Hi, this is Paul with Sand and Steel. I got Brian with me, and today we're going to go over some frozen foods that are posing around as healthy and do some analysis on them to figure out whether or not we should be eating them. And the first one he gave to me here is Amy's Cheese Pizza. And what looks from the box is what's interesting is it has some rice crust, and it's also gluten-free. And well, gluten-free is probably pretty healthy, and I see on the bottom here that it contains sunflower seeds. So that looks pretty good, right?
It looks good.
No GMOs. You know what GMO stands for?
Genetically modified
Organisms.
organisms.
Right? And it has no genetically modified organisms. So maybe it's good for us. So we're going to take a look here. So really to figure out if something's healthy, we have to look at the ingredients. We got to look at the macronutrients, right?
Okay.
So let's start with the macronutrients. So 530 calories. So for most people, that's going to be a whole meal by itself.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're dealing with a food that's a whole meal by itself, then we're going to kind of consider it in isolation. A lot of foods you can fix health problems with by adding stuff to the meal, but you're already almost at a third of your calories, so we can't do too much to help it if it's not good by itself. So looking at the ratios, we have 27 grams of fat, 56 grams of carbs, 17 grams of protein. So normally you want your ratios anywhere from 40% carbs, 30% fat, and 30% protein to 40% fat, 30% carbs, 30% protein. Now, even without having to do the math, I can see there's a big variance in the amount of carbohydrates to protein.
Mm-hmm.
Protein's way too low on this food. So that's one problem to start with. The fat is, unlike what I would expect, is most of it to be saturated fat, because the cheese, actually only 7 grams is saturated, 20 grams is a mixture of poly and mono. Now there are good types of poly and good types of unhealthy types of polyunsaturated, so we figure out which one's which. And as far as the carbohydrates, normally carbohydrates in pizza are not very helpful, but since it's a special pizza, we need to check. And the only way to do that is we have to go up to the ingredients. So the first thing is organic rice flour. Now rice generally is not a great food to eat because it's high glycemic index. When you pulverize a rice into flour, it becomes even more, the glycemic index increases because it's easier to digest. So there's not much difference between rice flour and any other kind of flour. It's going to get processed the same, except there's no gluten in it. That's good if you have a gluten allergy. One of the reasons why the fat's so low is they're using skim mozzarella cheese, which is great. You don't have all that animal fat in there, and it doesn't have some enzymes in it, which is probably a little more healthy. Organic tomato puree is fine. Filtered water is fine. Sunflower seed meal. Sunflower seeds are high in omega-6, which is a form of polyunsaturated fats, which is not the ones that we want to eat. We want to eat omega-3 ones. Organic tapioca starch is for kind of when you don't have gluten in a flour, it falls apart. Mm-hmm. One of the tricks to get around that is to use tapioca to glue it back together. It doesn't have the inflammatory properties, and that's how they accomplished it here.
Okay.
Extra virgin olive oil is good, so that's a lot of the fat that's here. It's not shown as monounsaturated fat. Organic potatoes. Potatoes are healthy in that they don't have things that are harmful, but they're really high in sugar. And so a lot of these carbs are coming from this rice flour and coming from potato. It's still high sugar. It's not technically sugar, but the glycemic index and the body's response to it's going to be just like sugar. Organic agave nectar. That's an expensive ingredient, although it really gets processed like sugar, slightly lower glycemic index. But this is a sugar, this is a sugar, this is a sugar. Safflower and sunflower oil are also not, these are highly processed oils, not things you necessarily want to be eating. Onions are fine, salt is fine, yeast is fine, honey, soy lectin, spice. So they put in some work to try to avoid using some of the really high processed sugars like high fructose corn syrup, but still they wound up having a lot of things that get digested like sugar. This by itself is imbalanced. If you wanted to eat like a third of this, and then you could balance it out by putting in some foods that are really high in fiber with some vegetables, and maybe a protein like chicken, and kind of using this as a mediocre starch for like your cheat meal, but only a third of it. But as it is by itself, it's really going to cause you to gain weight, even though it doesn't have too many processed foods in it.
So as a quick lunch, no go.
It's not going to help you lose weight, no.
Okay.
As healthy as it looks.
Uh-huh.